Hi, I'm Patrick, and welcome to Last Records. In today's video, I'm looking at the worst live TV deaths ever recorded, from a boxer who suddenly collapsed after a single punch, to a festival goer who went down under intense strobe lights in the worst way possible.
It was March 11th, 2017, when a Las Vegas arena filled for a televised welterweight championship bout. Pay-per-view cameras, positioned at multiple angles, prepared to broadcast the fight live to an international audience. Cortez Manuel was 26 years old, with a professional boxing record of 18 wins against 2 losses. Standing 5'10" and weighing 147 pounds, he had earned his title shot through decisive victories, showcasing aggressive counterpunching. Trainers described Cortez as stubborn about acknowledging injuries, viewing any admission of weakness as threatening his competitive standing. 3 weeks before the bout, during a sparring session, Cortez absorbed several hard punches to the left side of his head. He experienced persistent headaches for 2 days, which he attributed to routine training strain. He treated the symptoms with over-the-counter medication, and the headaches had largely subsided by fight week. Medical examinations required by the Boxing Commission 1 week before the fight included basic physical assessment and neurological screening, but no advanced imaging. Cortez passed all standard tests. He did not disclose his recent symptoms during the pre-fight medical evaluation. The championship bout began shortly after 10 that evening. The first 3 rounds proceeded competitively, with both fighters landing scoring punches. Broadcast commentators noted Cortez's aggressive approach and willingness to trade punches in close quarters. In the 4th round, the challenger landed a right hook that connected solidly with the left side of Cortez's head. The punch appeared clean, but not unusually powerful. Cortez stepped backward briefly, then resumed his stance. Over the next 90 seconds, his defensive coordination visibly deteriorated. His guard dropped repeatedly, and his footwork became flat and unresponsive. With approximately 40 seconds remaining in the round, Cortez lowered his hands completely and stood motionless in the center of the ring. His eyes remained open but unfocused. The referee stepped between the fighters immediately. As the referee reached him, Cortez's legs gave out. He collapsed backward onto the canvas, his head striking the mat as his body stiffened. Medical personnel positioned at ringside entered within seconds. Cortez was unresponsive with irregular breathing. Emergency protocols were initiated immediately. An ambulance crew transported him to a nearby trauma center within 12 minutes. Neurosurgeons performed an emergency craniotomy to relieve intracranial pressure from a rapidly expanding subdural hematoma. Imaging revealed extensive bleeding between the brain and skull, with evidence of older hemorrhaging consistent with injury sustained weeks earlier. Despite surgery, neurological function did not recover. Cortez was pronounced dead later that night. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from acute subdural hematoma with brain herniation caused by cumulative head trauma. The autopsy documented prior bleeding that had partially resolved, indicating Cortez had entered the fight with a pre-existing but undetected brain injury. The Boxing Commission launched a formal review of medical screening procedures following the incident. The challenger was cleared of wrongdoing. Regulatory bodies later emphasized stricter neurological reporting and encouraged advanced imaging for fighters disclosing head injury symptoms during training camps. It was June 12, 2015. The interior of a converted warehouse in Manchester, England, was lit by overhead studio lights that cast harsh shadows across an obstacle course designed to test physical endurance. Foam padding covered the concrete floor in designated zones, and safety crew members stood at intervals around the perimeter. Jordan Hale was 28 years old and worked as a personal trainer, earning a modest income from clients at a budget gym while pursuing fitness modeling opportunities. He had applied to compete on a physical endurance reality program after seeing audition announcements online. His application video emphasized his athletic background, though most of his training focused on weightlifting and short-duration exercises rather than sustained cardiovascular endurance. Friends described him as competitive and reluctant to show weakness, someone who frequently pushed through pain during workouts despite warning signs. The show's format required contestants to complete increasingly difficult physical challenges while cameras broadcast live to a studio audience and home viewers. Medical screening prior to filming included basic health questionnaires and blood pressure checks, but no comprehensive cardiac evaluation or stress testing. Jordan had reported no health concerns on his intake forms, omitting a family history of heart disease that had claimed his father at age 46. That evening's challenge involved a timed obstacle course combining rope climbs, heavy carries, and sprint intervals. Jordan began the course moving aggressively, completing the first 3 stations faster than previous contestants. By the 4th station, a 50-yard sprint while carrying 40-pound sandbags, his pace had slowed noticeably. Multiple cameras captured him stumbling slightly, but continuing forward. Approaching the final rope climb, Jordan dropped the sandbags and reached for the rope. He managed to pull himself approximately 6 feet up before his movements became uncoordinated. Witnesses later reported seeing his grip fail and his body go limp before he fell, landing on foam padding below. The fall itself was controlled and non-traumatic, but Jordan remained motionless after impact. A medic stationed nearby reached him within seconds and immediately began assessment. Jordan was unresponsive with no palpable pulse. The medic initiated CPR while calling for additional medical support. The broadcast cut away from the scene as crew members ushered the audience toward exits. A defibrillator arrived within 3 minutes, and emergency responders from a nearby hospital arrived approximately 12 minutes after the initial collapse. Resuscitation efforts continued for 38 minutes before Jordan was pronounced dead. The post-mortem examination revealed an undiagnosed congenital heart defect, a structural abnormality that had remained asymptomatic until the extreme physical stress of the challenge triggered a fatal cardiac arrhythmia. The medical examiner determined death resulted from sudden cardiac arrest due to previously undetected heart disease. The production company faced immediate legal action from Jordan's family, resulting in an undisclosed settlement and the show's permanent cancellation after 3 aired episodes. Broadcasting regulators implemented enhanced medical screening requirements for all physical competition programs, mandating cardiac evaluation, including electrocardiograms and family history review. The warehouse facility was later converted to a distribution center. It was March 15, 2016, in Gary, Indiana. An abandoned chemical processing facility, shuttered for 8 years, loomed over the surrounding industrial district with rusted smokestacks and corroded piping. Warning signs in multiple languages marked the site as a hazardous materials zone, while broken fencing and collapsed barriers showed repeated unauthorized entry since its closure. Caleb Hendricks was 22, a fitness influencer from nearby Chicago, whose online content focused on high-intensity workouts filmed in unconventional locations. His videos increasingly featured abandoned or restricted environments that emphasized physical exertion in extreme settings. The chemical facility fit that pattern, offering dramatic visuals and isolation well outside public spaces. The evening was clear and warm at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, with excellent visibility as Hendricks arrived during golden hour, carrying a DJI Phantom 3 drone and basic recording equipment. He had selected the site after researching abandoned industrial locations online, drawn to the visual contrast of corroded machinery and open concrete spaces. Wearing a basic hardware store dust mask, he entered through a gap in the perimeter fencing and moved deeper into the complex. Investigators later confirmed the facility had processed petroleum byproducts and sulfur compounds. Sealed storage tanks and processing chambers still contained residual materials that had slowly decomposed over time, producing hydrogen sulfide gas in enclosed areas with poor ventilation. At lethal concentrations, hydrogen sulfide overwhelms the sense of smell, providing no sensory warning of exposure. The gas is heavier than air, and tends to accumulate near the ground. Drone footage showed Hendricks walking through the outer sections of the facility before positioning himself near sealed processing units illuminated by broken windows. He set up his handheld camera on a piece of equipment and began a high-intensity workout that included floor-based exercises near the chambers, where gas accumulation was later confirmed at ground level. The drone remained positioned outside the building near a broken window, capturing exterior angles as a static camera. After several minutes, exterior footage showed Hendricks moving further inside toward areas where ventilation was minimal. The drone's signal began to weaken as structural interference increased. Through the windows, he could still be seen moving before the image became partially obscured. The handheld camera, recovered later, showed continued movement and exertion near the sealed units. Approximately 3 minutes after entering the deeper section, the footage showed Hendricks abruptly stopping mid-movement before collapsing to the concrete floor within seconds. The camera angle shifted as the equipment it rested on was struck during the fall. No recovery movement followed. When the signal dropped completely, the Phantom 3's return to home function activated, landing the drone automatically in the open area where it had launched. Its final footage showed the exterior of the building before the automated landing sequence completed. Emergency responders in full hazmat suits recovered Hendricks' body several hours later after a passerby noticed abandoned drone equipment outside the facility and contacted authorities. The handheld camera was found near his body. Toxicology results confirmed hydrogen sulfide poisoning as the cause of death. Multiple hazmat warning signs were clearly visible in the recovered footage. The investigation concluded that sealed processing chambers had generated lethal gas concentrations in poorly ventilated areas over the years since closure. The death was ruled accidental, resulting from unauthorized entry into a hazardous industrial environment while recording content. It was November 3, 2014, in downtown Phoenix. The morning rush hour unfolded under clear skies with minimal wind and excellent visibility. Bright morning sunlight and clear atmospheric conditions illuminated the busy 4-lane intersection with its heavy pedestrian and vehicle traffic. Rhonda Becker was 42 years old, a marketing coordinator who worked in a nearby office building. She had lived in the city for 6 years and regularly walked to work using established crosswalk routes, maintaining good physical health and following standard pedestrian safety practices. Her presence at the intersection involved her daily commute to work, crossing at the designated pedestrian crossing during the traffic signal cycle as part of her routine. Rhonda planned to cross the intersection using the marked crosswalk during the pedestrian signal cycle, which allowed roughly 30 seconds to cross before switching to a flashing countdown. Her preparation involved waiting at the corner with several other pedestrians for the signal change, following her established daily routine. The relevant risks included distracted drivers, red light violations, and heavy morning traffic volume creating dangerous conditions. Early warning signs included increased aggressive driving behavior due to rush hour congestion and several near-miss incidents at the same intersection during previous weeks. At the intersection's northeast corner, Rhonda waited with other pedestrians for the crossing signal, while a television news crew conducted a live traffic report from the southwest corner. At 8:17 a.m., the pedestrian signal activated, and Rhonda began crossing the street with the right-of-way, following standard pedestrian protocols. The morning rush hour was particularly heavy due to construction on a parallel street, diverting additional traffic. The television reporter explained the increased congestion to viewers while Rhonda checked her watch, running slightly behind schedule. Traffic moved slowly through the intersection as multiple vehicles approached from all directions during the peak commute period. Simultaneously, a pickup truck traveling southbound at approximately 35 miles per hour approached the intersection, with the driver later determined to be texting while driving, failing to notice the red traffic signal and continuing through the intersection without slowing. At 8:15 a.m., the vehicle struck Rhonda in the center of the crosswalk, propelling her approximately 15 feet forward onto the roadway. Rhonda sustained massive trauma to her head and torso from the collision, while the pickup truck continued for another 50 feet before the driver stopped briefly, then panicked and fled the scene at high speed. Witnesses immediately surrounded Rhonda while others pursued the fleeing vehicle. As the collision unfolded within the television crew's live traffic shot and the broadcast remained active, emergency medical services arrived at the intersection within 6 minutes of the collision, finding Rhonda unconscious and in critical condition. Paramedics performed advanced trauma care, including airway management and hemorrhage control, while preparing for immediate transport. But despite aggressive medical intervention, Rhonda was pronounced deceased en route to the trauma center approximately 15 minutes after the impact. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as multiple traumatic injuries, including severe head trauma, internal organ damage, and massive blood loss consistent with vehicular impact. Law enforcement located the fleeing driver 3 hours later, using witness descriptions and traffic camera footage, with the driver arrested and charged with vehicular manslaughter and leaving the scene of a fatal accident. It was June 14, 2015. The limestone cliffs of Zhangjiajie National Forest Park rose through morning mist, their moss-covered edges glistening with overnight rain. By noon, one of those edges decides the fate of a 27-year-old woman who had spent the morning arguing about camera angles. Brittany Famero wasn't famous, but she had built a modest following, posting hiking content online. The Los Angeles native had moved to Shanghai 6 months earlier, teaching English part-time while building her content portfolio. Her social media showed carefully composed shots from Chinese scenic spots, always featuring her against dramatic backdrops. Other content creators knew her reputation, meticulous about shots, but frequently clashing with guides over creative control. That morning, Brittany had hired a local guide for a waterfall overlook shoot. She had chosen the location specifically for the moss-covered cliff edge jutting above the falls. The guide later testified she arrived with detailed instructions, rejecting safer viewpoints from the start. He advised her more than once that the rock surface was slick from spray and recent rain, but she insisted the shot required standing at the exact edge. She spent nearly 3 hours directing him, moving rocks, adjusting positions, and critiquing his camera work with her phone. The cliff edge where Brittany insisted on shooting extended roughly 8 feet beyond the main trail, slick with moisture from the 65-foot waterfall below. The park had installed safety ropes and warning signs, warning visitors not to cross beyond the marked boundary due to unstable footing. She stepped over both repeatedly, returning to the exposed edge each time the guide repositioned her. For 20 minutes, she shuffled backward while the guide held her phone, zooming as instructed. She wanted the waterfall and valley visible behind her, requiring positioning as close to the edge as possible. The framing demanded she move backward without looking down at her footing. At 12:17 in the afternoon, Brittany took one step too many backward. Her left foot landed on wet moss at the cliff's absolute edge. The guide saw her foot slip, lunged to grab her, and shouted a warning, but could not reach her in time, dropping the phone in the process, then witnessed her tumble backward off the precipice. Her phone, later retrieved from a tethered waterproof case, captured her scream as she disappeared. The fall happened in segments. Brittany dropped headfirst for roughly 15 feet to the first outcropping, striking the jagged limestone below. The impact redirected her body sideways, and she tumbled another 25 feet against protruding rock before sliding the final distance into the shallow pool at the waterfall's base. The force of the fall caused catastrophic blunt force injuries across her body. The guide screamed for help but couldn't safely descend the wet cliff. He called park rescue at 12:19 in the afternoon. Other hikers gathered above, several calling emergency services. From their vantage point, they could see Brittany's body floating face down in the pool, her bright pink top visible through the mist. Park rescue teams arrived minutes later, aided by a nearby patrol that had been on routine rounds with rappelling equipment. When they pulled Brittany from the water, preliminary examination revealed unsurvivable traumatic brain injury, multiple rib fractures, and fatal internal hemorrhage. She had died within moments of the initial head head impact. Authorities recovered her gear, including the phone that had recorded almost everything. The footage showed exactly what the guide described, a content creator so focused on her shot that she stepped backward into empty air. Park officials retained the video as part of the investigation and did not release it publicly due to its graphic content. The park reinforced warning signage and installed additional barriers. It was June 21st, 2016, and late afternoon sun angled across a massive gorge in the southwestern desert where a steel cable stretched 1,400 feet between two cliff edges. The gorge dropped approximately 280 feet to a boulder-strewn riverbed below. A television network had positioned 12 cameras along both rims to broadcast the crossing live. Landry Voss was 37 years old and had established himself as a professional wire walker through increasingly ambitious performances over 14 years. Associates described him as confident to the point of dismissiveness, particularly regarding environmental factors he believed he could compensate for through skill. The network special had been promoted for 6 weeks as a live broadcast event. Landry's team had installed the 2-inch diameter steel cable 3 days earlier, with setup including a safety tether system consisting of a parallel cable designed to catch him if he fell while wearing a full-body harness. On the morning of the crossing, meteorologists warned that afternoon winds would intensify, with gusts potentially reaching 25 miles per hour by early evening. Landry's safety coordinator recommended postponing until conditions stabilized after sunset, but Landry declined, citing the live broadcast schedule and stating he had crossed in similar winds before. The broadcast began shortly after 7 that evening. Cameras captured Landry at the departure platform, wearing soft leather shoes with custom soles and carrying a 43-pound, 38-foot aluminum balancing pole. Landry stepped onto the cable and began his crossing. For the first several minutes, his movement appeared controlled. He paused occasionally, adjusting his pole position to compensate for minor wind variations. Approximately 620 feet from the departure point, roughly midway across where the cable sagged lowest, a sustained gust struck Landry from his right side. The wind pushed Landry's balancing pole sharply downward on the left side. He attempted to counter by shifting his weight right, but the pole's momentum was too great. The pole slipped from his grip and tumbled into the gorge. Without the pole's stabilizing mass, Landry's balance failed immediately. His arms windmilled as he tipped sideways off the cable. The safety tether engaged, and Landry dropped roughly 8 feet before the harness arrested his fall. He hung suspended beneath the cable, swaying in the wind. The broadcast continued. Cameras focused on Landry as he reached upward, attempting to grab the safety cable. For approximately 40 seconds, he struggled to gain purchase, his movements visible to the live audience. Moments later, the connection point failed. Investigators later determined that the carabiner had not been fully secured through the primary load-bearing loop of the harness. Under sustained tension and lateral movement, the improperly positioned connection shifted and disengaged from the tether. The attachment separated. Landry fell without obstruction. The live broadcast captured his descent for several seconds before he struck a cluster of boulders near the riverbed. His body came to rest among the rocks and did not move. Rescue personnel reached the canyon floor via helicopter approximately 25 minutes later. Paramedics found Landry deceased with injuries incompatible with survival. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from massive blunt force trauma involving catastrophic fractures of the skull, spine, pelvis, and extremities, with extensive internal organ disruption. Investigators documented the improperly secured carabiner and cited inspection procedures and weather assessment as contributing factors. The network issued a public apology and suspended similar live stunt programming pending internal review. Landry's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit that resulted in a confidential settlement. It was November 3, 2014. The newsroom of a regional television station operated under the routine chaos of late afternoon, with assignment editors coordinating field crews and producers reviewing scripts for the evening broadcast. In the main studio, lighting technicians finalized adjustments overhead, while camera operators checked framing for the 6 o'clock news block. The low hum of equipment and studio monitors filled the room as countdown clocks ticked toward air. Thomas Brennan was 52 years old and had anchored the evening news for 11 years. A familiar presence to viewers across 3 counties. He had worked in television journalism for nearly 3 decades, progressing through smaller markets before securing the anchor desk. Colleagues described him as reliable and methodical, rarely deviating from routine. Divorced and living alone, Thomas maintained a quiet personal life, staying in intermittent contact with his adult children who lived out of state. Earlier that afternoon, studio staff had reported intermittent flickering from one of the overhead key lights positioned above the anchor desk. The issue was attributed to a loose connector inside the lighting rig, and adjustments were made between rehearsals. The fixture remained powered, suspended roughly 12 feet above the set, its cabling routed along a metal support grid shared by multiple lights. That evening, Thomas arrived on schedule and followed his standard pre-broadcast routine. He reviewed scripts at the anchor desk, confirmed story order with the producer, and adjusted his earpiece while makeup staff completed final touch-ups. As the opening graphics rolled, he took his seat under the studio lights, hands resting on the desk as cameras went live. The broadcast opened normally, with Thomas delivering headlines in a steady tone. Several minutes in, viewers noticed him pause briefly between sentences. Studio footage later showed him shifting slightly in his chair, his right hand tightening against the metal edge of the desk frame. His speech resumed, but words came out unevenly, and he missed a line on the teleprompter. The floor director stepped closer from off-camera. At that moment, Thomas jerked forward, his shoulders tensing as his right hand clenched against the desk edge, unable to release. His hand struck the desk, and he slumped forward, knocking papers aside. The studio feed cut to a commercial break within seconds. Crew members reached him immediately. Thomas was unresponsive, with shallow, irregular breathing and no detectable pulse moments later. The studio's power to the overhead lighting grid was shut down as a precaution while emergency services were contacted. A station security officer initiated CPR until responders arrived. Emergency personnel reached the studio within minutes and continued resuscitation efforts before transporting Thomas to a nearby emergency department. He was pronounced dead later that evening. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be sudden cardiac arrest caused by electrical shock, consistent with exposure to a live current transmitted through energized studio equipment connected to the overhead lighting grid. Subsequent inspection identified internal insulation failure within the overhead lighting fixture. The station issued a brief on-air statement later that night. An independent safety review led to a full replacement of studio lighting systems and mandatory electrical inspections. Thomas's desk remained empty for the remainder of the ratings period, and a small scholarship fund for broadcast journalism students was later established in his name. It was November 6, 2016. A ring light illuminated a small table covered in food containers inside a one-bedroom apartment in a residential high-rise in Incheon, South Korea. The rest of the room was dim, a bed visible in the background, a clothing rack, blinds drawn, the camera framed tight on the table and the man behind it. Gyubin Baek was 26 years old and had spent the past 3 years as a full-time mukbang streamer, broadcasting himself eating large quantities of food to a live audience 5 nights a week from that apartment. He earned his income entirely through viewer donations and sponsorship deals with food delivery services. Friday night streams regularly drew roughly 4,000 concurrent viewers. His mother, who lived 40 minutes away by transit, visited weekly to help clean. She later told investigators she worried about the isolation, the hours alone, the eating, the routine that never seemed to change. Gubin had a signature move his audience had turned into a meme. Mid-bite, he'd pause, look directly at the camera with exaggerated wide eyes, and give a slow, deliberate thumbs up. Fans screenshotted it constantly. It had become his most recognizable image. He was competitive and stubborn about challenges, refusing to slow down during timed eating segments because viewer donations spiked dramatically during the final minutes. He'd pushed through visible discomfort in previous streams, and his audience had come to expect it. That Friday evening, he went live at 9 o'clock with roughly 4,200 viewers. The challenge was timed: a large quantity of tteokbokki, dense, chewy cylindrical rice cakes in thick sauce, a staple of Korean mukbang content. He was trying to beat his own previous record. Donations began immediately as the timer started. The first 15 minutes were routine: steady eating, narration between bites, the thumbs up to cheers in chat. Then he increased the pace: larger bites, less chewing, a faster rhythm. Donation amounts climbed. Approximately 22 minutes in, he paused abruptly. His jaw stopped mid-chew. His hand moved to his throat. He attempted to swallow, neck extended, head tilted back. Nothing moved. He tried again. His expression shifted from effort to something rigid. He pushed back and stood. The chair fell behind him. He leaned forward, mouth open, attempting to cough. No sound of air. He struck his chest with an open palm, then harder. His face reddened under the ring light. His eyes were wide, not the performative wide eyes of the thumbs up, but locked open and unblinking. Chat flooded. Spit it out, drink water, call help. He pressed his abdomen against the table edge, but the table slid across the floor. He dropped to his knees. His movements became uncoordinated. He reached toward the camera, then his arm dropped. He collapsed sideways, partially visible in the frame. The seated camera angle captured only his torso and one still hand. His movement ceased within 2 minutes of the obstruction. The stream continued. Ring light, food, overturned chair, his motionless form at the edge of the frame. Viewers contacted Korean emergency services, but could provide his username, not his physical address. Dispatchers coordinated with the platform to trace his account, a process that created significant delay. Responders arrived roughly 35 minutes after the obstruction. The building manager unlocked the door. Gubin was pronounced dead on arrival at a nearby hospital. The medical examiner determined asphyxiation from complete airway obstruction. A dense bolus of rice cake had sealed the oropharynx. The platform implemented voluntary guidelines recommending solo streamers register a dispatchable address. His mother asked that the stream not be shared. A community fundraiser raised funds for his family, and his channel was archived at her request. It was July 22nd, 2017, in Queens, New York. A small basement restaurant, known for extreme spice challenges, had built a reputation among online creators who wanted dramatic reactions on camera. The walls were lined with photos of customers drenched in sweat, and a chalkboard near the counter listed simple rules: no milk, no refunds, stop whenever you want. Staff members were used to seeing people quit halfway through a challenge, coughing and laughing while cameras kept rolling. 26-year-old Priya Kapoor arrived that evening with a small camera crew to film a live stream for her channel. She had built a modest following by eating painfully spicy foods and reacting for views. Although her audience was not massive, she treated every challenge like a personal test of endurance. She often told viewers she had never quit a challenge, even when it became uncomfortable. That reputation mattered more to her than the restaurant's warnings or the limits printed clearly on the wall. The dish she ordered was called the Reaper Bowl, a thick, oil-heavy soup loaded with Carolina Reaper peppers, Trinidad scorpion peppers, and concentrated capsaicin extract. The owner explained that most participants stopped early because the heat caused uncontrollable coughing and throat irritation. He warned her directly, if the coughing starts, stop eating. Priya agreed on camera, nodded to her crew, and told viewers she planned to beat the record time. The live stream chat began filling with encouragement, urging her to push through the pain. When the broadcast started, she began eating faster than recommended. Within minutes, the capsaicin triggered violent coughing fits. Her face flushed red, and tears streamed down her cheeks as viewers watched in real time. Instead of slowing down, She kept scooping more soup, pausing only long enough to gasp for air between coughs. The owner reminded her again that she could stop at any moment, but she waved him off and reached for another bite. Comments on the screen urged her not to quit, and she leaned into the pressure, trying to finish quickly. During one intense coughing fit, she inhaled sharply while holding a spoonful of soup near her mouth. A thick piece of pepper and liquid entered her airway. At first, it looked like normal coughing, but within seconds, the violent coughing triggered a sudden airway spasm, and she could no longer speak or pull in air. She stood up suddenly, knocking her chair backward and grabbing her throat. The owner rushed behind her and attempted abdominal thrusts while her crew continued filming in confusion. Some food material was expelled, but she remained unresponsive and collapsed moments later with only a faint pulse. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes, cleared food from her airway using suction, and provided oxygen while transporting her to the hospital. During transport, her heart rhythm became unstable due to prolonged oxygen deprivation, and resuscitation efforts began. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, determining that complications from choking and aspiration during the extreme eating challenge caused hypoxic brain injury. The restaurant closed temporarily during the investigation, and the live stream was removed, leaving behind a recording of a moment that had started as entertainment and ended in a preventable tragedy. It was September 8th, 2015, in northern Georgia. The morning brought partly cloudy skies with comfortable conditions and light humidity during peak service hours. Natural lighting from stained glass windows provided normal visibility inside the traditional brick church building with wooden pews and standard ventilation systems. Norbert Finch was 71 years old, a retired postal worker who had attended the same church for over 20 years. He maintained regular attendance at weekly services and participated in various church activities throughout his retirement. Norbert had experienced mild chest discomfort earlier that week, but dismissed it as indigestion. Witnesses later stated that he appeared normal during the early portion of the service. His presence there involved his normal Sunday worship routine with his wife of 40 years. Norbert planned to attend the complete morning service, which typically lasted 90 minutes, including hymns, sermon, and closing prayers. His preparation involved his usual Sunday morning routine, without any unusual activities or stressors that might indicate impending medical issues. The relevant risks included his advanced age and potential undiagnosed cardiovascular conditions common in his demographic. The chest discomfort from earlier in the week represented the only warning sign, though Norbert showed no outward signs of distress during the service. The incident occurred in the fourth pew, from the front, on the right side of the main sanctuary. Norbert sat in his customary location next to his wife, following along with the service program. At 11:32 a.m., during the pastor's sermon about community service, Norbert began showing signs of physical distress that witnesses observed as clutching his chest and breathing heavily. Within 30 seconds, Norbert's condition deteriorated rapidly as his face became pale and he began sweating profusely despite the comfortable temperature. At 11:33 a.m., Norbert collapsed sideways in the pew, his body going limp and unresponsive, while several congregation members immediately recognized the medical emergency. The camera remained fixed at the front of the sanctuary, with no operator present to adjust framing as the situation unfolded. Church members with medical training responded within 2 minutes, attempting cardiopulmonary resuscitation, while others contacted emergency services. Several congregation members with medical training moved into position while others stood nearby, partially obscuring the camera's view of the pew. The pastor's voice remained audible over the church microphone system as movement spread through the sanctuary, while some attendees stepped into the aisles during the response. The sanctuary camera continued streaming the wide shot as movement in the aisle partially blocked the view, while the broadcast audio picked up low voices and footsteps. Norbert remained unconscious and unresponsive throughout the resuscitation attempts, with his breathing becoming irregular before stopping completely at 11:38 a.m. The live feed showed Norbert leaning forward before he disappeared from full view as people stepped between him and the camera, leaving only partial visuals of the response. Emergency medical personnel arrived at the church 12 minutes after the initial emergency call, continuing advanced life support measures for an additional 20 minutes. Despite aggressive resuscitation efforts, including defibrillation and cardiac medications, Norbert could not be revived and was pronounced deceased at the scene at 12:05 p.m. The medical examiner's autopsy revealed Norbert had suffered a massive myocardial infarction caused by complete blockage of his left anterior descending coronary artery, with examination showing extensive underlying coronary artery disease that had gone largely undiagnosed. The death was ruled natural causes, with the sudden cardiac event being consistent with his age and underlying cardiovascular pathology. It was August 23, 2015, and midday sun beat down on a 14-story concrete hotel on the outskirts of Atlanta. The building had sat vacant for 3 years and was scheduled for controlled demolition. 2 local news stations were broadcasting the event live, and spectators had gathered behind barricades set several hundred feet from the structure. Gavin Mercer was 41 years old and had worked as a demolition engineer for 16 years, overseeing more than 60 controlled implosions across the southeastern United States. Colleagues described him as meticulous but overconfident, someone who trusted his own calculations absolutely and pushed back on outside review. The demolition plan called for several hundred pounds of charges placed across the building's first 4 floors in a precisely timed sequence designed to fold the structure inward on itself. The firing sequence involved 3 time delays, each separated by roughly half a second, pulling the building's core downward before the outer walls followed. 2 days before the demolition, an independent structural assessor hired by the property owner flagged concerns about the building's east-facing support columns. A previous renovation had reinforced them with additional steel, which the original survey had not fully accounted for. The assessor recommended adding supplemental charges to the east side to ensure symmetric collapse. Gavin reviewed the findings and dismissed them, arguing that the existing charge placement provided sufficient redundancy. He signed off on the demolition plan without modifications. The assessor documented his objection, but had no authority to override. On the morning of the demolition, Gavin positioned himself at the command post, approximately 450 feet from the building's east face, well within the established perimeter, but in a location he had used on dozens of previous jobs. A safety officer suggested he relocate to the backup post on the north side, which offered better shielding behind a concrete parking structure. Gavin declined, saying he needed a clear sightline to the east wall. The countdown began just after noon on the live broadcast. At 0, the firing system activated. The first 2 sequences detonated as planned, and the building's center began to buckle inward. Then, the 3rd sequence reached the reinforced east columns. The charges fractured the concrete, but failed to sever the steel reinforcement completely. Instead of folding inward, the east wall resisted for roughly 2 seconds before shearing away as a massive intact slab. A large section of the east wall toppled outward rather than collapsing downward. It landed well beyond the anticipated collapse line, sending concrete fragments and debris farther than expected. A chunk of concrete roughly the size of a car tire traveled outward and struck the command post. The impact hit Gavin directly, throwing him backward into the equipment behind him. The live broadcast captured the collapse and the massive dust cloud that followed. Producers cut the feed within seconds as screams became audible from the spectator area. Emergency crews already staged nearby reached Gavin within 2 minutes. He was unresponsive with severe head and chest injuries. Paramedics initiated resuscitation efforts, but he showed no signs of neurological activity. He was transported to a nearby trauma center where physicians confirmed injuries incompatible with survival. Gavin was pronounced dead approximately 40 minutes after the blast. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from massive blunt force trauma to the head and chest, including catastrophic skull fractures and severe internal injuries. State and federal investigators cited the failure to account for the reinforced columns as the primary cause. The demolition firm's operations were temporarily halted pending investigation, and the independent assessor's written objection became central evidence in the wrongful death lawsuit filed by Gavin's family. It was January 28, 2018, beneath a bridge in Duluth, Minnesota, where icicles hung from the overpass as winter sunlight reflected on snow and traffic hummed across the frozen river. Ryan Madsen was 31 years old and had spent 7 years operating plow and salt trucks along northern Minnesota highways. His job required constant assessment of winter hazards, including ice buildup on bridges and overpasses, where falling formations were a known danger to vehicles and pedestrians. Outside of work, he maintained a small YouTube channel with 1,247 subscribers, filming strength demonstrations and winter stunts with minimal equipment. His channel brought in a small amount of ad and viewer support each month, which supplemented his pay, and he had recently upgraded his camera gear to improve video quality. Confident in judging hazards, Ryan studied falling ice for years, filmed himself punching smaller icicles without injury, earned modest praise online, and grew convinced he could control the next break. That Sunday afternoon, Ryan stopped beneath a particularly large icicle hanging from the underside of the bridge. Temperatures had risen to 28 degrees, causing minor surface melting, but no visible fractures. The formation measured nearly 4 feet long and 8 inches across, weighing an estimated 70 to 80 pounds. He parked his truck on the shoulder, activated his hazard lights, and set up his camera on a tripod aimed upward. At 2:47 p.m., he began recording and explained his plan to viewers, joking that it was just another winter cleanup. 3 cars passed during setup, drivers slowing as they noticed him standing beneath the ice. Ryan positioned himself directly under the tip, glanced once at the camera, and raised his right fist. He struck the base with a forceful upward punch. The upward force from his blow transferred directly into the frozen anchor point, shearing the formation loose from the concrete. The ice fractured cleanly, but instead of shattering into pieces, the entire icicle detached at once. For a fraction of a second, it hung suspended in the air. Then it fell. The heavy mass dropped straight down, spinning slightly as sunlight flashed across its jagged edge. Ryan had no time to move. The pointed end struck just below his collarbone at full speed, punching through muscle and driving deep into his upper chest. The impact pierced his right lung and tore several major blood vessels inside the thoracic cavity. He collapsed instantly onto the snow, bright arterial blood spreading across his jacket and pooling beneath him. The camera continued recording as he struggled to roll onto his side. He tried to inhale, but each breath came out as a wet, gurgling sound as blood filled his airway and the punctured lung began to collapse. A passing motorist slowed, then stopped when he saw Ryan motionless beneath the bridge. The driver called emergency services and ran toward him, pressing gloved hands against the wound in an attempt to slow the bleeding. Ryan's eyes remained open and unfocused, his lips turning pale as his breathing weakened. Paramedics arrived within minutes and immediately began resuscitation efforts, applying oxygen and attempting to control the hemorrhage. Despite rapid intervention, the blood loss was too severe. Ryan was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined that death resulted from hemorrhagic shock due to massive internal bleeding following penetrating chest trauma and a punctured lung. The camera continued recording after the impact until the passing motorist shut it off. Investigators recovered the footage as evidence, but it was never released publicly. Following the incident, the Regional Transportation Department updated winter inspection and removal procedures for large ice formations on bridges and overpasses. Annual winter hazard training now emphasizes the unpredictable physics of falling ice and the dangers of attempting removal without proper equipment. It was September 18, 2013. The brightly lit stage of a late-night variety program stretched 40 feet across, with elevated platforms at varying heights designed to showcase performances. Thick padding surrounded the stage's perimeter, and rigging equipment hung from reinforced ceiling mounts 25 feet above the stage floor. Nina Volkov was 31 years old and had worked professionally as an acrobat and aerialist for 9 years, performing with small touring companies and corporate events throughout Europe. She specialized in trapeze and aerial silk routines, building a reputation for technically clean performances rather than high-risk maneuvers. Booking agents described her as reliable and safety-conscious, someone who inspected equipment carefully and refused performances with inadequate rigging. She had accepted this television appearance after months of reduced bookings, viewing it as exposure that could lead to more consistent work. Aerial performances require rated equipment and redundant safety systems, while professional riggers typically verify load ratings and backup attachments. The variety show relied on a local staging crew with limited experience in human load rigging, as they normally handled lighting and scenic elements. That evening, Nina arrived for rehearsal 6 hours before the live broadcast and immediately noticed concerns with the rigging setup. The primary attachment point used a single carabiner rather than the double clip system she normally required. The rigging crew assured her the equipment was rated for her weight with a significant safety margin, and the show's producer emphasized the tight schedule, urging her to proceed with rehearsal so adjustments could be made if necessary. Nina reluctantly agreed to a limited rehearsal, restricting her movements to low-level positions. The equipment held, and the setup was deemed adequate as broadcast time approached, leaving her concerns unresolved as the studio audience was seated. The live performance began shortly after 8 in the evening. Nina ascended a silk rope to a height of approximately 18 feet, executing a series of wrapped poses while suspended. Audience members and cameras captured her movements as she transitioned into a descent maneuver that placed her full body weight on the silk at maximum extension. The single carabiner failed under the dynamic load. Rather than fracturing, the carabiner rotated under cross-loading, forcing the gate partially open until the attached termination hardware slipped through. Nina dropped suddenly as the rigging connection released. She fell 18 feet along a lateral arc created by the offset rigging point, moving beyond padding designed for vertical falls and striking the stage floor at the edge of the padded zone. The impact occurred in the clear view of cameras and several hundred audience members. Nina landed primarily on her left side, with her shoulder and hip taking most of the initial force, but her head struck the floor surface immediately after. She remained conscious initially, attempting to sit up before losing consciousness approximately 20 seconds after impact. Medical personnel stationed backstage reached her within 40 seconds. Emergency services arrived less than 10 minutes later and transported her to a trauma center. Nina underwent emergency surgery for a subdural hematoma and multiple fractures, but neurological damage was severe. She remained in intensive care for 4 days before life support was withdrawn. The medical examiner determined death resulted from a traumatic brain injury sustained in the fall. The production company faced criminal negligence charges over inadequate safety protocols, while the staging company lost its license and dissolved after civil litigation. Broadcasting rules were later revised to require independent safety inspections for aerial performances, and the program was canceled after one additional season. It was April 22, 2017. The private villa on Cancun's southern coast sat surrounded by mangrove lagoons, where brackish water concealed dangers. Ariel Montoya, a 30-year-old content creator from San Diego, crouched at the water's edge with her waterproof camera inches from a crocodile, which she'd been hired to feature in a promotional video for an exotic pet tourism company. Ariel had spent 6 years building a social media following around exotic animal encounters. She'd handled pythons in Thailand, swam with sharks in South Africa, and fed bears at wildlife sanctuaries across North America. Her Instagram showcased thousands of photos with dangerous animals, each post earning sponsorship deals that funded her lifestyle. She had no formal training in animal behavior or handling, but her fearless approach and willingness to get closer than others had built her reputation. Friends described her as confident and street smart, someone who learned by doing rather than studying. The villa's management had imported the crocodile specifically for wildlife tourism content. It was over 14 feet long and weighed approximately 900 pounds. Staff members had warned Ariel multiple times that morning about maintaining distance, reminding her that rescue poles and a boat were on standby but could not be used unless she remained at a safe perimeter. But she dismissed their concerns with a wave, insisting she knew what she was doing. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Ariel had positioned herself at the shallow lagoon edge, holding raw chicken to coax the crocodile closer for dramatic footage. The villa's groundskeeper, stationed 30 feet away, watched nervously as she leaned forward, camera extended. The crocodile floated motionless in murky water, its eyes just above the surface, fixed in her direction. Ariel stepped into ankle-deep water, focusing on her camera screen rather than the animal. The crocodile exploded from the water with terrifying speed. Its jaws clamped onto Ariel's left forearm, pulling her forward with sudden force. She screamed as the animal's weight dragged her forward into the shallow lagoon, her camera still recording as she hit the water. The animal maintained its grip, pulling and twisting as she lost her footing and was dragged into deeper water. The water churned violently as the crocodile released her arm and lunged again, seizing her torso. She struggled to stay above the surface as staff shouted from the shoreline. The animal pulled her into deeper water, submerging her completely. Witnesses reported seeing violent thrashing beneath the surface for close to half a minute before the water became still. The crocodile surfaced once, Ariel's leg visible in its jaws before it pulled her under again. The groundskeeper had immediately called emergency services, while other staff attempted to reach her with poles, but the crocodile's aggression prevented any intervention. A single handler had been scheduled but left the perimeter briefly, and rescue poles and a boat were not deployed before the attack. When the animal finally released its grip and retreated, Ariel floated face down near the lagoon's edge, her body showing extensive trauma consistent with a large crocodile attack. Paramedics arrived approximately 15 minutes after the initial call. They pulled Ariel from the lagoon. Medical examination revealed massive trauma to her left arm, torso, and both legs, with severe blood loss and drowning as contributing factors. She was pronounced dead at the scene at 3:47 in the afternoon. Mexican authorities removed the crocodile from the property the following day, relocating it to a wildlife facility. The exotic pet tourism company faced immediate investigation and suspended operations. Ariel's recovered footage was given to her family after the authorities reviewed them. It was August 12, 2016, in downtown Seattle. Overcast skies dominated the afternoon with light drizzle affecting the planned demonstration. The public plaza, surrounded by buildings and commercial structures, experienced damp conditions from intermittent light rain, leaving surfaces slick across the plaza. Dusty Malone was 25 years old, a college student studying environmental science who had participated in several peaceful protests over the past 2 years, focusing on environmental and social justice issues. He possessed basic climbing experience from recreational rock climbing, but had no professional training with electrical systems or utility infrastructure. His presence at the demonstration involved participating in a protest against proposed industrial development in protected wilderness areas. Dusty planned to hang a large banner from a utility pole to increase visibility for the protest message, bringing climbing rope and a handmade banner measuring 8 feet by 4 feet. His preparation involved basic climbing equipment but lacked proper safety assessment of the electrical hazards present. The relevant risks included electrical hazards from overhead power lines and height dangers of climbing utility infrastructure, with early warning signs including wet conditions from light rain, increasing electrical conductivity, and proximity of high-voltage transmission lines running parallel to the street. The incident occurred at a utility pole located on the plaza's eastern edge, approximately 30 feet from the main protest gathering. Dusty began climbing the wooden pole at 2:45 p.m., using his rope and basic climbing techniques to ascend toward the 25-foot level, while a news crew filmed the demonstration live for evening broadcast, positioned with a clear view of the entire plaza. The demonstration had drawn approximately 200 participants, with speakers addressing the crowd through portable sound systems. Dusty's climbing attempt drew attention from fellow protesters, with some calling out height warnings, while others encouraged his effort. The wet conditions made the wooden pole slippery, requiring him to grip tighter as several protesters filmed his ascent with their phones. At 2:47 p.m., Dusty reached the upper portion of the pole and began securing his banner to the crossbeam structure. But while adjusting the banner's position, he moved closer to an energized 7,200-volt distribution line running above the crossbeam, bringing his hand into contact with the conductor during the wet conditions. The electrical contact lasted less than 1 second before the shock caused him to lose control and fall from the pole. He fell 25 feet, striking the concrete plaza surface below as the news camera's wide shot continued recording the demonstration during the fall. Emergency responders arrived at the plaza within 7 minutes of the incident, finding Dusty unconscious and in cardiac arrest. Paramedics immediately began advanced life support measures, including defibrillation and cardiac medications, while coordinating emergency transport. But despite continuous resuscitation efforts, Dusty could not be revived and was pronounced deceased at the regional medical center 45 minutes after the electrical contact. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as cardiac arrest caused by high-voltage electrical shock, with contributing factors including severe burns and traumatic injuries from the subsequent fall. The investigation determined Dusty had entered the minimum clearance zone of an energized distribution line while attempting to secure the banner. Officials ruled the death accidental, citing unsafe proximity to electrical infrastructure during the climb. It was April 11th, 2015, when stadium lights illuminated a packed Supercross arena outside Phoenix. Spectators filled metal bleachers surrounding the dirt track as 22 riders prepared for the 9th round of the national championship. Multiple sports networks carried the race live. Evening temperatures remained warm, and track officials completed final inspections before the main event. Dane Strickland was 24 years old and competed professionally in the 250SX class. Over several seasons, he had built a reputation as a talented but aggressive rider who pushed himself and his equipment hard during competition. That afternoon during practice, his team mechanic detected unusual play in the motorcycle's front fork assembly after a series of heavy landings. The mechanic recommended replacing the fork seals and inspecting the damping cartridge, estimating the work would take roughly 90 minutes. Dane declined the repair, stating the bike still felt stable. The mechanic documented the recommendation and the refusal, then rechecked visible components before qualifying concluded. No external leaks were observed at the time, and the bike was cleared for the main event. Shortly after 8 that evening, the starting gate dropped. Engines roared as riders accelerated into the first turn. Dane held mid-pack position through the opening laps. The course's most technical feature was a triple jump, requiring riders to launch from a steep ramp, clear roughly 60 feet, and land on a downslope before entering a left-hand turn. Riders typically approached at speeds near 50 miles per hour. On the 4th lap, broadcast cameras followed Dane as he accelerated toward the triple. His approach speed matched prior laps. As the motorcycle left the ramp, the front suspension compressed normally, but on landing, the compromised damping system failed to absorb the impact. The front fork collapsed abruptly, unable to stabilize the downward force. The bike pitched forward. Dane was thrown over the handlebars as the motorcycle continued down the landing ramp. He tumbled across the downslope, striking headfirst. Despite wearing a full-face helmet, the motorcycle separated and slid to a stop several yards away. Race officials immediately waved red flags. Medical personnel on track vehicles reached him within seconds. Dane was unconscious and breathing irregularly. His cervical spine was stabilized before he was secured to a backboard and transported by ambulance to a nearby trauma center. Despite emergency surgery to relieve intracranial pressure, Dane never regained consciousness. He was pronounced dead approximately 4 hours after the crash. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from severe traumatic brain injury with associated skull fractures and diffuse axonal injury, along with multiple cervical spine fractures. Investigators later confirmed failure within the front fork's damping cartridge caused by internal seal deterioration and hydraulic fluid loss, reducing the suspension's ability to absorb landing forces. The sanctioning body initiated a mechanical review following the incident and emphasized stricter pre-race inspection procedures. Dane's family later established a foundation advocating for enhanced mechanical safety awareness in competitive motorsport. It was August 17, 2018. A wide stretch of beach along the Massachusetts coast lay under overcast skies, the sand still dark and heavy from a rainstorm that had passed through overnight. Behind the beach, a line of dunes rose steeply, 10 to 12 feet of packed, wind-sculpted sand running parallel to the waterline. Lysander Ouellet was 20 years old and a college sophomore studying communications. He ran a small but growing live stream channel built around dares, challenges, and reaction content. His following was modest, a few thousand regular viewers, but the engagement was intense. His audience didn't just watch, they directed. That distinction matters a lot. He had a signature format. He'd read a dare from chat, stare into the camera for exactly 3 seconds without blinking, then accept it with a 2-word response his audience had turned into a catchphrase. The 3-second pause was the bit, his most clipped moment, and the reason his chat pushed harder every stream. You could see why people kept coming back. His roommate later told a reporter that Lysander kept a whiteboard in his bedroom tracking his subscriber count, checked before and after every upload, sometimes twice. 20 years old, I want you to keep that in mind. He was streaming that afternoon from the beach with 2 friends. The content was loose, no plan, just reading chat. He'd brought a collapsible shovel for a sandcastle bit. Chat had other ideas. Suggestions escalated. Dig a hole, dig deeper, dig a tunnel into the dune. Lysander read the dare aloud, paused 3 seconds, and accepted it. He started digging horizontally into the dune face at ground level, carving out a cavity roughly 3 feet wide. His friend had propped a phone on a cooler about 8 feet away, still streaming. Lysander was 4 feet deep into the dune, his upper body inside the cavity, only his legs visible, when his friend standing nearby noticed the sand above the opening sag downward. He told Lysander to get out. Lysander backed partially out, his torso now visible, and looked up at the overhang above him. The collapse was sudden. A slab of wet, compacted sand roughly 6 feet wide dropped vertically, burying him from the chest down in a single movement. Additional sand flowed in immediately after, settling around his neck. His friends dropped to their knees and began digging with their hands and the shovel. Wet sand is extraordinarily heavy. Each handful they removed was replaced by more settling from above. Other beachgoers ran over 5, then 8 people clawing at compacted sand around a 20-year-old whose breathing was growing audibly shallow. His chest could not expand against the weight. He responded to his friends' voices at first, short words, strained, then stopped. His eyes closed. The phone on the cooler recorded everything. Emergency services arrived roughly 20 minutes after a beachgoer called. Rescue crews used specialized tools to remove the compacted sand. Lysander was extracted approximately 40 minutes after the initial collapse and pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be compressive asphyxia. Saturated sand on his chest and abdomen prevented respiratory function. Investigators noted wet sand weighs roughly 130 pounds per cubic foot and behaves unpredictably when undercut. The beach authority installed permanent signage prohibiting dune excavation. His university held a memorial. His roommate told a reporter the whiteboard was still on the wall when he moved out. It was July 22, 2017, in Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. The Lamar Valley stretched across the landscape under clear morning skies, with temperatures reaching a comfortable 72 degrees Fahrenheit and light breezes providing perfect visibility across the grasslands. A scattered herd of American bison grazed peacefully across the valley floor, their massive forms creating dramatic silhouettes against the mountain backdrop. Zara Blackwood was 25, a travel blogger from Portland who had developed a passion for wildlife photography during her college years. She had been visiting various locations across the western United States, documenting her experiences with nature and wildlife. Blackwood was particularly drawn to large mammals, fascinated by their behavior and eager to capture intimate footage that would showcase their natural beauty and power. The clear morning provided good visibility across the valley. Blackwood carried a GoPro Fusion 360 camera mounted on an extended pole, planning to capture unique footage from multiple angles simultaneously. She had researched Yellowstone's wildlife extensively online, studying bison behavior and movement patterns to better understand their habits. Regulations clearly required visitors to maintain at least 25 yards distance from bison, with multiple brochures and signs explaining that these animals were wild and unpredictable despite their docile appearance. Blackwood had read the safety information, but proceeded beyond the recommended distance limits while recording. Blackwood began recording while approaching a lone bull bison that was grazing approximately 100 yards from the main herd. The bull bison weighed approximately 2,000 pounds and stood nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder, but remained stationary and grazing prior to the charge. Her 360-degree camera captured her steady approach as she moved closer for increasingly detailed shots. Blackwood moved to within approximately 15 feet of the bull bison, extending her camera pole to capture close-up footage of the animal's head and massive shoulders. The 360 camera recorded continued movement and proximity as the animal remained stationary and continued grazing. She repositioned several times to adjust the camera angle for closer footage. The bull bison's head lifted suddenly. Within 2 seconds, the animal charged. The 360 camera footage became immediately chaotic, capturing rapid spinning motion and fragmented images as Blackwood attempted to flee. The audio captured sudden impact sounds and rapid ground contact as the attack began. The camera pole was struck during the attack, causing the footage to show disjointed angles of ground, sky, and the bison's massive form in rapid succession. The recovered footage showed approximately 4 seconds of violent, shaky imagery before the camera landed face down in the grass, the audio continuing to record sounds of the attack. The camera remained in that position, recording muffled audio and a view of grass and dirt for several minutes before the sounds ceased and the bison's hooves could be heard moving away. Rangers found Blackwood's body minutes later after other tourists reported the incident from a safe distance. The 360 camera was recovered several feet from her body, with the footage showing her approach and the chaotic moments of the attack. though much of the actual impact was obscured by the rapid, uncontrolled movement of the camera. Multiple safety brochures about bison behavior were found in her backpack, indicating she had received proper safety information. The bull bison had returned to the main herd and showed no continued aggression. The investigation report confirmed the cause of death as massive trauma from goring and trampling, with the attack lasting approximately 5 to 7 seconds based on audio analysis and witness accounts. It was July 18, 2019, in Phoenix, Arizona. The setting was a rented suburban house with a backyard swimming pool. The pool had a shallow end and a deep end that reached approximately 9 feet. The afternoon temperature was above 100 degrees. 23-year-old Dylan Carter operated a growing illusion-based account with just over 5,000 followers. His videos focused on recreating visual tricks and explaining how they worked. Engagement had slowed in recent weeks, and he had been planning something more ambitious. That day, he announced he would live stream a walking on water illusion and reveal exactly how it was done. Several of Dylan's friends were present to help film content for his social media channel. The illusion used thick, clear acrylic panels placed just beneath the surface of the pool, designed to support weight only when properly secured. Dylan had bought 3 thick sheets earlier that week and positioned 2 of them so their ends rested along the pool's tile, coping with rubber padding underneath. The third panel was placed between the outer sheets to close the gap. Even though it had no clamps, brackets, or structural support, it relied only on friction and overlap to stay aligned. During setup, the panel shifted along the smooth tile edge, clearly showing it could move under his weight, but he chose to reposition it instead of anchoring it. He knew the center section wasn't secured, but decided to continue anyway, believing slow movement would keep it from sliding. Shortly after 3 in the afternoon, he went live while friends filmed from the patio. He explained the illusion to viewers while standing on panels he had not fully secured. He stepped onto the first section carefully as the acrylic flexed beneath him. From the camera's angle, it looked like he was standing directly on the water, and the live stream overlay showed viewers warning him about the shifting panels as he continued toward the unsecured center section. As he transferred his weight onto the middle sheet, the added lateral force caused it to shift despite the rubber padding. It slid several inches sideways and rotated as one overlapping edge lost contact. His right foot slipped as the surface tilted beneath him. He attempted to regain balance, but the panel continued to slide. He fell sideways toward the edge of the pool. During the fall, his head struck the rigid tile, coping with significant force before the rest of his body entered the water. The sound of the impact was audible in the recording. He surfaced briefly, but appeared confused and uncoordinated, failing to swim toward the edge. Within seconds, his body went limp and slipped beneath the surface again. One of his friends entered the water immediately and pulled him to the edge. He was unconscious, but still breathing irregularly. Emergency services were called within moments. Paramedics transported him to a trauma center, where imaging revealed a severe skull fracture and intracranial hemorrhage caused by the impact with the tile coping. Despite emergency surgery, brain swelling progressed over the next 48 hours. 2 days later, he was pronounced dead due to complications of traumatic brain injury. Authorities ruled the incident accidental, citing unsafe placement of structural materials over a swimming pool and lack of proper mechanical securing mechanisms. No criminal charges were filed. The video was removed from the platform shortly afterward. It was January 19, 2018. The remote wilderness of northern British Columbia stretched beneath heavy cloud cover, with temperatures hovering near 14 degrees and snow depth reaching nearly 30 inches in exposed areas. Wind moved steadily through the sparse forest, carving drifts around fallen timber and exposed rock. Visibility was reduced as low clouds pressed against the tree line, flattening sound across the terrain. Connor McLeish was 33 years old and worked seasonally as a wilderness guide, leading hiking and camping groups during summer months. During winter, he relied on savings and temporary work, He had been selected to participate in a survival-based television program that placed contestants alone in remote environments with minimal equipment, documenting their experience through continuous self-filming. Connor had legitimate outdoor experience, though most of his professional work involved prepared campsites, moderate weather, and active emergency communication systems. The program's format required contestants to conduct scheduled live satellite check-ins, during which video and audio feeds were transmitted directly to production staff monitoring from a control facility. These check-ins served both as content and welfare verification. Participants were also required to maintain recorded daily logs between live segments. Extraction protocols allowed producers to intervene if a contestant failed to appear or displayed signs of medical distress. Connor had been deployed to his location for 12 days. Weather conditions during that period were significantly harsher than seasonal averages, with nighttime temperatures dropping below zero and persistent wind interfering with fire maintenance. His food reserves had been exhausted days earlier, and producers later noted visible weight loss and slowing movement during recent broadcasts. That morning, Connor initiated his scheduled live check-in shortly after sunrise. The video feed showed him seated near his shelter entrance, wrapped loosely in layered clothing. A thin layer of frost covered the ground around him, and the surrounding trees stood motionless, muffling sound as the live feed stabilized under weak morning light. His hands shook continuously as he attempted to adjust the camera. Speech was delayed and uneven, with frequent pauses between words. He struggled to maintain eye contact with the lens, repeatedly lowering his head as if losing focus. Producers monitoring the feed noted his slowed responses and asked him to perform basic movement checks required under safety protocol. Connor attempted to stand, but failed to rise fully, collapsing back onto the ground. The camera tipped sideways, capturing him partially in frame as he tried to pull himself upright using a nearby log. Over the next several minutes, his movements became weaker and less coordinated. He crawled toward the shelter opening, pushing the camera out of view as he moved. Audio remained live, capturing labored breathing and intermittent scraping sounds. Attempts by producers to communicate through the satellite link went unanswered. The live feed continued as Connor lay motionless just inside the shelter entrance, visible through the partially collapsed doorway. No further movement was observed. After several minutes without response, producers terminated the broadcast and activated emergency extraction procedures. A helicopter reached the site approximately 6 hours later after weather conditions allowed. Emergency personnel found Connor unresponsive near the shelter entrance with no detectable vital signs. His core body temperature was critically low, and death was confirmed at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be severe hypothermia, with contributing factors of caloric depletion and physical exhaustion. Review of the live broadcast footage showed progressive motor impairment consistent with advanced cold exposure. The incident prompted an external safety review, resulting in stricter removal thresholds, shorter check-in intervals, and expanded medical authority. The season concluded with a brief memorial card during the final episode's closing credits. It was July 19th, 2018, in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. Clear afternoon skies marked peak summer season at the Mountain Adventure Park, with bright sunlight providing excellent visibility across the forested canopy where zipline cables stretched between platforms at heights reaching 150 feet. Willa Porter was 29 years old, a marketing coordinator from Atlanta, visiting the area on vacation with friends. She had brought a small action camera to document her trip and wanted to capture footage of the zipline ride. She happened to be there while a local television crew was filming a live promotional segment for the park. The zipline course featured 6 cables spanning distances between 200 and 800 feet. The final zipline stretched 800 feet across a valley at 150 feet above the forest floor. Riders reached speeds of 35 to 40 miles per hour and were required to brake manually by gripping the cable behind them with both gloved hands as they approached the landing platform. The cable's slight upward angle toward the platform was designed to slow riders naturally, but manual braking was still required to reduce speed from approximately 30 miles per hour to a safe landing speed. Willa planned to ride the final zip line while wearing a chest-mounted camera. Her preparation involved a standard safety briefing and 2 practice runs on shorter zip lines. The guide initially stated park policy prohibited camera equipment during rides, but after Willa signed an additional liability waiver and demonstrated proper hand positioning on 2 practice runs, the guide allowed her to proceed with the chest-mounted camera. At 3:16 p.m., a television crew was broadcasting live from the landing platform area, with their reporter discussing the park's safety features and popularity. Lance Dunlap, the station's camera operator, had positioned his camera to capture wide shots of the zipline attraction as backdrop for the segment. Willa prepared at the launch platform, wearing her chest-mounted camera. At 3:17 p.m., she launched from the platform and accelerated down the cable, reaching speeds estimated at 35 to 40 miles per hour, while the live broadcast continued below. Approximately 600 feet into the ride, Willa's body position shifted as she adjusted to look down at the forest below. The movement caused her harness to rotate slightly as she reached toward her chest to stabilize the camera, removing her right hand from the safety strap. At 200 feet from the platform, Willa needed to begin braking by gripping the cable behind her with both gloved hands. Her right hand was still near her chest camera. The guide at the landing platform saw her position and began shouting instructions to grab the cable. Willa reached back with her right hand but could not achieve proper grip due to her rotated position and forward momentum. Willa's speed remained at approximately 30 miles per hour as she approached the platform. At 3:18:45 p.m., she struck the landing platform's wooden edge barrier at torso level at high speed. The television camera, positioned to capture the zip line in the background of the promotional segment, recorded the collision live on air before the station immediately cut away. The impact caused severe trauma to her torso, and she became unresponsive while remaining suspended in the harness attached to the cable. The impact triggered the trolley's emergency brake system, but her momentum had already carried her past the platform, leaving her suspended 15 feet beyond. The guide reached Willa's position within 90 seconds. She was unresponsive and showed no signs of breathing. Park medical staff arrived within 3 minutes. Emergency services reached the platform 18 minutes after the impact. Despite aggressive medical intervention, Willa could not be revived and was pronounced deceased at 3:52 p.m., approximately 34 minutes after impact. An autopsy determined the cause of death was massive blunt force trauma to the chest and abdomen, with cardiac rupture and liver laceration causing death within seconds. The investigation found all equipment functioned properly. Investigators determined the impact occurred after Willa was unable to establish a stable braking position as her body rotated during the approach. With the chest-mounted camera cited as a contributing distraction, the death was ruled accidental, with state officials prohibiting liability waiver exceptions that compromise standard safety procedures. It was July 4th, 2019, and late afternoon light reflected off the glass face of a 42-story hotel tower on the Las Vegas Strip. A temporary platform had been constructed on the rooftop observation deck, roughly 480 feet above street level. A cable television network was broadcasting a live holiday special featuring a series of extreme stunts, with the final act being a base jump from the tower. Nolan Ferris was 33 years old and had completed over 900 base jumps across 11 years, including exits from buildings, bridges, antennas, and cliff faces around the world. He held a skydiving license with over 4,000 freefall jumps. Friends described him as calculated but susceptible to external pressure, someone who sometimes accepted conditions he would normally reject when sponsors or cameras were involved. The jump plan called for Nolan to exit the platform, freefall for approximately 3 seconds, then initiate deployment of a single pilot chute to extract his main canopy. A designated landing zone had been cleared in a hotel parking area directly below. Base jumping rigs do not carry reserve parachutes due to the low altitudes involved, making the single deployment the only opportunity. During the pre-jump equipment check that afternoon, Nolan's rigger noticed that the pilot chute's bridle line showed minor fraying near the attachment point. The rigger recommended swapping the entire deployment system, a process that would take approximately 20 minutes. Nolan examined the bridle himself and judged the wear to be superficial. He told the rigger the equipment was fine and that replacing it would delay the broadcast window. The live segment began shortly after 7 that evening. Cameras positioned on the rooftop, on adjacent buildings, and at street level captured Nolan standing on the platform edge with the city skyline behind him. A countdown graphic appeared on screen. At 0, Nolan stepped off the platform and entered freefall. His body position appeared stable and controlled as he accelerated downward. At approximately 3 seconds into the fall, Nolan reached back with his right hand and threw the pilot chute. Cameras from an adjacent rooftop captured what happened next. The pilot chute inflated briefly, then the frayed bridle line partially separated under load. Rather than cleanly extracting the main canopy from the container, the pilot chute fluttered erratically, generating insufficient drag. The main canopy began to emerge, but never fully inflated, streaming uselessly behind Nolan as a tangled ribbon of fabric. Nolan was seen reaching back with both hands, attempting to manually pull the canopy free. His altitude was now below 150 feet and dropping rapidly. He struck the pavement of the parking area approximately 6 seconds after exit. The impact was captured by multiple cameras before producers cut the broadcast. Street-level audio recorded screams from the crowd that had gathered to watch. Emergency medical personnel staged in the landing zone reached him within seconds. Nolan was found deceased with massive injuries. No resuscitation was attempted. The medical examiner determined that death resulted from catastrophic blunt force trauma consistent with high-velocity vertical impact, including severe head, spinal, and internal injuries. Federal and state investigators documented the bridle line failure and criticized the decision to proceed with compromised equipment. Nolan's rigger gave a detailed statement confirming his pre-jump warning had been overruled. The network reached a confidential settlement with Nolan's family and permanently ended its live stunt programming. It was October 31st, 2016 in Detroit, Michigan. Light rain slicked the concrete inside a massive abandoned automotive factory as early darkness set in, with poor visibility, unstable flooring, and cold air settling through the exposed structure. Knox Delmar was 24, an urban exploration influencer known for filming abandoned industrial sites and posting high-risk explorations to grow his following. His recent videos increasingly featured isolated, deteriorating structures. For Halloween, Delmar undertook a solo night exploration of the factory while recording continuously. He wore a chest-mounted action camera and carried additional batteries to sustain uninterrupted filming. Delmar entered through a ground-level opening where fencing had collapsed. His footage showed unstable flooring, standing water, and scattered debris as he moved deeper into the building. He climbed toward the upper floors, drawn by darker corridors and more dramatic visuals. In his backpack were dog treats and packaged dog food, items recovered later alongside his recording equipment. Investigation later determined that 3 feral dogs had been sheltering on the 3rd floor for an extended period. The animals used a large enclosed room for warmth and protection, retreating there during bad weather. They avoided people when possible, but the confined space and limited exits made them defensive when approached. As Delmar entered the 3rd floor corridor, his camera captured movement ahead. The dogs were visible near the entrance to their shelter area, alert and tense. One dog stepped forward while the others remained close behind. The animals held their ground rather than fleeing, blocking the narrow passage. Instead of backing away, Delmar slowed and approached. His camera recorded him extending food toward the dogs while continuing forward. The distance between him and the animals closed to only a few feet. The dogs responded with defensive lunges, forcing Delmar to stop abruptly. The first dog rushed him, biting at his lower leg before retreating. As Delmar stumbled backward on the wet concrete, a second dog lunged, knocking him off balance. He fell hard, striking the floor near broken debris. The dogs continued short, defensive attacks, bite, and retreat, focused on keeping him out of their territory rather than pursuing him. The chest-mounted camera captured chaotic movement as Delmar attempted to rise. Blood was visible on the floor, from multiple bite wounds to his legs and arms. His movements became slower as he struggled to stand on the slick surface. After several seconds, the dogs retreated back toward their shelter area, leaving Delmar injured and motionless. Delmar's body was discovered several days later by other urban explorers moving through the upper floors of the building. Emergency services were notified after his damaged camera, and recorded footage were found near the scene. Investigators later determined Delmar died from blood loss and blunt force trauma sustained during the encounter. Animal control removed 3 feral dogs from the building. Recovered footage confirmed Delmar had intentionally approached the animals, despite visible signs of defensive behavior. It was February 11, 2014, in a studio apartment in Modesto, California. The room was silent except for a kettle click, a hiss of steam, humming lights, and fading headlights. Dylan Kruber was 22 years old and worked overnight shifts at a food distribution warehouse, earning a modest hourly wage, moving pallets into refrigerated trucks. He had left a local culinary arts program after 1 semester, following repeated warnings for ignoring kitchen safety rules. Dylan ran a small YouTube channel focused on extreme eating challenges, filming late at night with basic equipment. After 8 months, the channel had reached 847 subscribers and brought in only a small amount each month, reinforcing his belief that pushing further was the only way to be noticed. The apartment's galley kitchen measured 6 feet by 4 feet, with a single electric burner and a countertop that doubled as his filming surface. Dylan's previous videos included consuming raw habanero peppers, drinking expired milk, and attempting to eat a stick of butter in under 2 minutes. He had researched competitive eating techniques online, but possessed no formal training in food safety or first aid. The ceramic bowl he selected that evening held approximately 16 ounces and had been purchased from a dollar store 3 weeks prior. That Tuesday evening, Dylan announced his intention to break what he claimed was an unofficial boiling ramen speed eating record. He had measured 2 cups of tap water into his electric kettle and waited for it to reach full boil. Weather conditions were irrelevant, but the apartment's heating system had been malfunctioning for weeks, keeping indoor temperatures around 58 degrees. The low temperature offered no meaningful protection once the boiling water contacted his airway. He had positioned the camera 18 inches away at table height, providing an unobstructed view of his face and upper torso. The kettle clicked off at full boil just before he poured. Dylan poured the water directly over a brick of dry ramen noodles at approximately 8:47 p.m., according to the camera's timestamp. The ceramic bowl conducted heat efficiently, making it painful to handle within seconds. The steam curled toward his eyes, stinging slightly, but he barely noticed as his hands trembled with excitement. The first mouthful of boiling water caused immediate contact burns to his lips and tongue. Dylan's reflexive gasp drew scalding liquid and steam directly into his larynx and trachea. Rather than stopping, he tilted the bowl further, forcing several ounces of boiling water down his esophagus. The thermal shock triggered violent retching, expelling the liquid across his face and neck, where it caused second-degree burns to exposed skin. Swelling in his throat tissue began within 30 seconds. Dylan clawed at his neck as his airway narrowed, producing high-pitched stridor sounds as air struggled to pass through the constricted passage. He fell from his chair at 8:49 p.m., landing on the linoleum floor, where he remained for the duration of the incident. The camera continued recording as his face and neck visibly expanded from internal swelling. His breathing became increasingly labored over the next 12 minutes. The thermal damage had caused his epiglottis and surrounding tissues to swell, gradually sealing his airway completely. By 9:01 p.m., all movement had ceased. His landlord discovered the body the following morning after Dylan failed to report for his warehouse shift. The coroner's report identified third-degree burns throughout the oral cavity, pharynx, and upper esophagus, with the mucosal lining completely destroyed in several areas. The cause of death was asphyxiation due to airway obstruction from thermal injury-induced edema. The unedited footage was provided to investigators and later used in workplace safety training programs. Dylan's former co-workers established a memorial fund that distributed burn prevention materials to local vocational schools for 3 years. It was August 23, 2016. The afternoon sun blazed over Seoul's Gangnam district, where sleek commercial buildings reached into cloudless skies. On the rooftop of a 10-story office complex, Lena Park, a 26-year-old drone content creator, was about to make a fatal miscalculation. Lena had built a modest following creating aerial content for tech brands and local businesses. She wasn't famous, but she'd carved out a reliable income filming promotional videos and testing consumer drones for online reviews. Born in Busan, she'd moved to Seoul 3 years earlier, renting a small studio apartment and investing heavily in camera equipment. She'd recently landed a contract with a consumer electronics company to review their new quadcopter drone. Friends described her as ambitious and technically competent, though sometimes impatient. That afternoon, Lena had rented rooftop access from a commercial building's management company for 50,000 won. The space was popular with photographers and videographers, offering panoramic city views. Friends she was messaging said that she planned to film herself controlling the drone while simultaneously recording on a selfie stick, a technique she'd used successfully dozens of times before. Her new drone featured obstacle avoidance sensors and could reach speeds of up to 45 miles per hour in sport mode, which disabled obstacle avoidance. Commercial rooftops in Seoul's business districts are cluttered with infrastructure, HVAC units, ventilation systems, satellite dishes, and electrical boxes create a maze of obstacles across tar paper surfaces, while safety railings are often minimal or poorly maintained in older buildings designed before modern safety codes. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Lena had launched her drone and was holding a smartphone on a selfie stick with one hand while a belt-mounted controller rattled in the other. The drone began drifting toward the building's edge. Security footage showed Lena breaking into a sprint, trying to maintain visual contact while managing both the controller and selfie stick. What happened next unfolded in a matter of seconds. Lena's foot caught on a low HVAC ventilation unit she hadn't noticed while watching her drone. The low ventilation unit blended into the rooftop surface, partially shadowed and easy to miss while running, sending her sprawling forward at full speed. Her momentum carried her directly toward the building's edge, where a rusted safety rail stood well below standard rooftop height requirements. Lena's body struck the inadequate railing at hip level. The corroded metal bent backward under her weight, offering no resistance. The selfie stick, still recording, captured her tumbling forward into empty space. She rotated mid-air before impact. Her body struck the concrete alley below. A building security guard stationed near the stairwell landing witnessed the fall. He immediately called emergency services at 3:16 in the afternoon. Narrow alley access and confusion over the rented rooftop's official address slowed the ambulance. They arrived 12 minutes after the call. Paramedics found Lena unresponsive with no pulse. The medical examiner's report documented massive skull fractures, bilateral rib fractures, ruptured spleen, and catastrophic internal bleeding. Death had been nearly instantaneous. The building management company faced immediate legal action from Lena's family. Investigators found the rooftop's safety railings hadn't been inspected in over 8 years. Her drone footage was recovered, but never publicly released, deemed too disturbing by her family. Investigators made a sealed copy of the footage for evidence. The building installed proper safety barriers within 2 months, and Seoul's municipal government launched inspections of commercial rooftop rental spaces across the district. It was September 22, 2019. Pale granite stretched along the edge of a fjord in northern Norway, dropping several hundred feet to dark water below. No fencing lined the cliff edge, no signage marked the drop. Sparse vegetation clung to cracks in the rock, and low autumn sunlight cast long shadows across the open terrain, making depth and distance difficult to judge. Tavo Korhonen was 41 years old, a licensed land surveyor in Finnish Lapland who had built a side career as a landscape drone photographer, selling prints and licensing aerial footage to tourism boards across Scandinavia. His following was modest: photography enthusiasts and drone operators who appreciated his precision and remote locations. Divorced with 2 children, colleagues described him as deeply focused, someone who could spend 3 hours adjusting a single angle without speaking. One later told investigators he'd once walked into a parked excavator while checking GPS readings. He wore the same battered orange beanie in every video, his late father's fishing hat from decades on trawlers in the Gulf of Bothnia. Followers worldwide mailed him orange beanies. He kept them in a box by his front door, but never wore any on camera, only the original. A regional tourism board had contracted him for aerial footage of the fjord coastline. The shot required him to walk along the cliff top while piloting the drone, maintaining legal line of sight with the aircraft while monitoring shot framing on the handheld controller screen. Both tasks required his attention directed outward and downward, away from his footing. He was working alone. The tourism board had not arranged a safety observer, something that should have never been optional for a job like this. He had scouted the location the previous day. He arrived early that morning, parked his rental vehicle at a gravel pullout roughly 1.5 miles from the cliff section, and hiked in with his equipment. No other people were present. No spotter, no fencing, no other hikers. Just him and a screen. Tavo launched the drone from a flat area roughly 30 feet from the cliff edge. The drone's onboard memory card, recovered later from the aircraft, recorded the full sequence. He completed one pass successfully, walking roughly 200 feet along the cliff edge and back, eyes shifting between the controller screen and his footing. The footage intermittently captured him from the side, the orange beanie visible against gray rock, his gait steady, his path a consistent 3 to 4 feet from the edge. He began a second pass, adjusting the drone to a lower altitude for a tighter angle on the cliff face. The adjustment required more precise input on the controller. His attention shifted almost entirely to the screen. On the drone footage, his walking path drifted gradually closer to the edge. His feet moved within 2 feet. He did not appear to look down. His left foot stepped onto a section where the rock edge was fractured and slightly undercut, visually indistinguishable from solid ground. The edge gave way. On the footage, he dropped from frame in a single step, one moment walking, the next, empty rock and a small cloud of dust where he had stood. The drone, receiving no further controller input, continued its programmed path for several seconds before activating its automatic return to home function. As it ascended and rotated toward the launch point, the wide-angle lens swept across the cliff edge, the fracture point visible, the disturbed rock, and far below, a motionless shape on the rocks at the waterline. The drone landed at its launch point and powered down after the battery timeout. It sat on the grass beside his equipment bag for the rest of the day. When Tavo didn't return his rental vehicle that evening, the agency contacted local authorities. A search team reached the fjord the following morning and found his equipment, the drone, and his vehicle at the pullout. His body was recovered from the cliff base by a Coast Guard team, approximately 300 feet below on rock at the waterline. The medical examiner determined massive blunt force trauma, including catastrophic cranial injuries. Death was instantaneous, and if there's any small mercy in this story, the drone's memory card provided full reconstruction. Guidelines were later introduced requiring tethers or spotters for commercial operators working near cliff edges. His ex-wife later told a journalist their daughter wore the original orange beanie to his memorial. The box from followers was still by the front door. It was August 29, 2017. Along the Texas Gulf Coast, the sky had turned an unnatural gray-green as wind gusts bent palm trees nearly horizontal, and storm surge from Hurricane Harvey pushed seawater across coastal highways. Rain fell in sheets so thick that visibility dropped to less than 30 feet in some areas. Marcus Gray was 34 years old and had worked as a meteorologist for a regional news station for 6 years. He specialized in severe weather reporting and had covered tropical systems before, though never one with Harvey's intensity. Colleagues described him as eager and thorough, someone who prepared meticulously for field assignments, but occasionally underestimated rapidly changing conditions. He volunteered for the live coverage assignment, citing his prior experience with severe weather systems. That morning, the production team established a temporary broadcasting position along a seawall approximately 15 feet above normal water levels. The location had been selected earlier in the week when projections showed moderate storm surge potential. By midday, conditions had worsened significantly. Water had already risen to within 3 feet of the seawall's top, and National Weather Service updates warned of catastrophic surge potential in that specific zone. The station's remote producer suggested relocating to higher ground, but Marcus insisted they could maintain the position safely for one more segment, citing the dramatic visual backdrop. Shortly after noon, Marcus began a live report describing wind speeds and rising water. He stood approximately 8 feet from the seawall's edge, with the broadcast van parked behind him as a partial windbreak. The camera operator filmed from inside the vehicle, while a producer monitored from 20 feet away. Waves had begun crashing over the seawall, sending spray across the roadway. During the broadcast, a significantly larger wave struck the concrete barrier. By that point, storm surge had already raised water levels to within a few feet of the seawall's top. Witnesses later described seeing a wall of water surge over the barrier with enough force to carry debris, including sections of wooden dock, metal signage, and chunks of concrete. Marcus attempted to move backward, but the safety line restricted his movement range. The wave hit him directly, knocking him off his feet and dragging him toward the seawall's edge as it receded. He managed to grab a metal railing post, holding on as water rushed around him. The producer began moving toward him, but was forced back by another incoming surge. Marcus maintained his grip for approximately 15 seconds before a second wave, carrying a heavy wooden beam torn from a nearby pier, struck him across the upper back and head. The impact loosened his grip, and the receding water pulled him over the seawall edge into the churning surge below. The camera continued recording as the situation rapidly deteriorated. The remote control room struggled with signal instability caused by the storm, delaying the decision to cut away as emergency assistance was requested on site. Coast Guard dispatch received notification within 2 minutes, but rescue operations were severely limited by the storm's intensity. Search efforts began as conditions allowed, focusing on the area where Marcus had gone into the water. Recovery teams located his body 3 days later, approximately 2 miles down the coast, partially buried in storm debris. The medical examiner determined death resulted from blunt force trauma to the head and chest, with drowning as a contributing factor. Injuries consistent with high-velocity impact suggested the wooden beam had caused severe cranial fractures before he entered the water. The network implemented mandatory evacuation protocols for field crews when storm surge warnings exceeded specific thresholds. Marcus's family established a scholarship fund for aspiring meteorologists at a state university, distributing awards annually to students, emphasizing safety practices in severe weather reporting. It was June 8, 2019, in the desert near Barstow, California. The desert stretched for thousands of square miles of harsh terrain, with summer temperatures regularly exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. The area was remote, with long distances between roads and minimal cell phone coverage in many sections. 29-year-old Ryan Hawthorne had driven out to the desert alone to film a 7-day survival challenge. Ryan had built a following of over 7,000 subscribers on his outdoor survival and bushcraft channel. He posted videos about wilderness skills, primitive camping, and survival techniques. Ryan had quit his job as an electrician 18 months earlier to pursue content creation full-time. He prided himself on his knowledge of survival tactics and his ability to endure harsh conditions. The challenge was straightforward: survive alone in the desert for 7 days with minimal supplies, demonstrating water procurement, shelter building, and desert navigation skills. Ryan had brought a tarp, a knife, a metal container, a small amount of food, 3 gallons of water, his camera equipment, and a satellite phone for emergencies. He had scouted the general area 2 weeks earlier and believed he knew where to find additional water sources. The first 2 days went according to plan. Ryan found a location near a rock formation that provided some shade. He set up his tarp as a sun shelter and organized his supplies. The temperature reached 112 degrees. He rationed his water to about half a gallon per day and filmed segments about desert plants and survival priorities. He appeared confident and in control. The 5th day was critical. Ryan woke up severely dehydrated. His morning update showed him struggling to speak clearly. His eyes appeared sunken, and his movements were slow. He had less than half a gallon of water remaining. He told the camera he was going to make an attempt to find water at a location about 4 miles away where he thought there might be a cattle tank. He packed his remaining water, the satellite phone, and 1 camera. Ryan began hiking, filming periodically as he walked. The footage showed him moving slowly, stopping frequently to rest. By midday, the temperature had reached 115 degrees. Ryan's speech and his updates became increasingly slurred and confused. He mentioned feeling dizzy and nauseous. Ryan continued filming for another few minutes, speaking directly to the camera. He said he had made a mistake and should have stayed at his shelter. His words were barely coherent. He apologized to his family and his followers. The camera remained recording as he slumped against the bush and stopped moving. Hikers discovered Ryan's body 3 days later, 6 miles from his original shelter. Search and rescue teams were called to the location. Paramedics confirmed Ryan had been dead for approximately 72 hours. The medical examiner determined he had died from severe dehydration and heat stroke. The footage was recovered and later used by wilderness safety organizations to demonstrate the dangers of underestimating desert conditions. His channel was taken immediately to discourage anyone planning to do the same. What began as a demonstration of survival skills ended as a documented reminder that preparation and knowing when to quit can mean the difference between life and death. It was July 19th, 2018 in Austin, Texas. The evening brought sweltering heat with temperatures reaching 95 degrees Fahrenheit and oppressive humidity levels during the festival's peak performance hours. Visibility varied dramatically between bright stage lighting and darker crowd areas, with frequent strobe light effects from the performances creating intense lighting conditions within the crowd area. Jace Kellerman was 22 years old, a college senior studying business administration with no known medical history of neurological conditions. He had attended music festivals previously without incident and maintained good physical health, but had been at the festival for approximately 8 hours and awake for over 20 hours while consuming alcohol moderately. His presence at the festival involved celebrating summer break with friends at the 3-day music event, experiencing typical festival conditions, including heat and dehydration. Jace planned to watch the headlining performance on the main stage, which featured extensive lighting effects and high-volume sound systems. His preparation involved minimal food intake during the day and continued alcohol consumption in the heat, creating potentially dangerous conditions. The relevant risks included dehydration, heat exhaustion, sleep deprivation, and potential seizure triggers from strobe lighting in susceptible individuals. Early warning signs included Jace's increasing fatigue and mild confusion, which friends attributed to alcohol consumption and heat exposure rather than recognizing potential medical concerns. The incident occurred in the general admission area, approximately 100 feet from the main stage, where Jace stood with thousands of other festival attendees, while a television crew broadcast live coverage of the headlining performance for a music network. At 9:52 p.m., the performer began a song featuring intense strobe lighting effects synchronized with heavy bass frequencies that may have contributed to the episode. The crowd's energy peaked as the headlining act launched into their most popular song, with thousands dancing in unison. Jace and his friends were positioned in the dense general admission area, surrounded by festival goers who had waited hours for the performance. The combination of body heat limited air circulation, and intense lighting created oppressive conditions that intensified the already stressful crowd conditions. Within 30 seconds of the strobe light sequence beginning, Jace began showing signs of neurological distress as witnesses observed him becoming disoriented and stumbling despite being stationary in the crowd. At 9:53 p.m., Jace suddenly collapsed to the ground and began experiencing uncontrolled full-body convulsions consistent with a generalized tonic-clonic seizure that continued for approximately 2 minutes before progressing into status epilepticus. Jace's body exhibited severe muscle contractions and loss of consciousness, while festival security and nearby attendees attempted to clear space and protect him from injury during the convulsions. The continuous seizure activity became life-threatening as it showed no signs of stopping naturally, with the live television broadcast capturing Jace's collapse and subsequent emergency response efforts as medical personnel pushed through the dense crowd. Festival medical staff reached Jace's location within 6 minutes of the initial collapse, finding him in continuous seizure activity and respiratory distress. Emergency medical technicians administered anti-seizure medications and established airway management while coordinating emergency transport through the crowded festival grounds. But despite aggressive medical intervention, including multiple anti-seizure drugs and advanced life support, Jace's seizure activity could not be controlled. Jace was transported to the regional medical center, where neurologists continued treatment for status epilepticus, but he remained unresponsive and in critical condition before being pronounced deceased after 18 hours due to complications from prolonged seizure activity and resulting brain damage. The medical examiner determined the cause of death as status epilepticus, with no underlying seizure disorder, likely associated with a combination of severe dehydration, sleep deprivation, alcohol consumption, heat stress, and intense strobe lighting exposure, with the case ruled natural death due to an unpredictable first-time seizure event.